I hope you're having a good day and that your army is doing well. My army's a mid. Sisters at 49% and Genestealer Cult at 49%. So I don't want to hear any more about how the Genestealer Cult are so OP and no one can play against them except the super fast Aeldari. But we'll get more into them later. This video will briefly cover each faction and why they are the way they are in the global meta. I don't play all these armies, I mean, let's be upfront about that, but I think you guessed that no one ever does. So for any faction, you're best off looking for individual experts who play those factions, as they will know best in detail what's up. I play Genestealer Cult and Sisters of Battle, so come to me for expert advice on those factions, and let me know if I was way off on any other faction, or if there's more you want to add. Then the comments can be useful for all players of all factions. And while I don't play each faction, by now I have played against every faction in 10th edition of 40k, so I can tell you what to expect in general. Most of these games that we have results for are at 2k. So if you're playing at 1k or 500 points, you will get a different meta tier list as different units are used, and bigger hitters like Wraith Knights are very unlikely to appear. The local meta are also different, so what I say here may not necessarily be how your games turn out at your friendly local gaming club. It is the state of the world in general. At one point there were a lot of Australian tournaments won by demon players, so when someone turned up with Grey Knights, which at the time had specific demon killing rules, Grey Knights went way up in Australia despite performing average globally. My local meta has a lot of infantry heavy armies, so Deathguard with their artillery-like Plague Burst crawlers have them high up on win rates, but even higher now that they've had a points drop. Last edition and at the start of 10th edition, almost every Aeldari army I saw was a Wraithguard heavy one, and when I talked to Proxy Hammer in a podcast, he'd seen more transports and Windrider bikes. No army is unplayable. Even the Drukhari. Keep the faith. You may get a bad matchup and have to negotiate army lists with your opponent, but overall, this is looking more balanced compared to at the start of 10th edition, when I could joke that the Eldar had a 67% win rate and that 1/3 other of lost games was only against other Aeldari players. Oh, how we laughed! And then we're like, actually, yeah, that could be true. So now the heavy balance work is done, minor tweaks are needed to help out, say, the Genestealer Cult Magus. The Drukhari. Since 3rd edition, they had the heavy lifting done by the Witchers. They are very underpowered right now, in an edition with 13-point Space Marines for Black Templars and 14-point Space Marines for Space Wolves. 11 points for a Cabalite is painful. They only really have Dark Lancers for anti-tank, so as a Dark Eldar player, you have to force your list to include as many of them as possible. Anti-tank is crucial in an edition that has finally fixed the feeling of tanks being made of paper that pervaded 8th and 9th edition. The Drukhari have strength. Being able to advance and charge with Witches is scary, but Overwatch, even weak Overwatch, greatly hurts their hitting power. They have a lot of speed, but none of the special rules that came with Fly from the past 2 editions, like Fall Back and Shoot, and how flying units move has changed, not in their favour. So they are feeling the loss when flying transports are their whole thing. Part of the pain comes not from pain tokens, but their detachment. You get more pain tokens from having an Archon, Succubus and Homunculus, so much like in past editions, their army composition is just weird and forces you to have all of them to make use of all of the stratagems. When they have a Codex with individual detachments tailored towards one of the 3, we will see their meta strength go up. But their unit abilities, such as the Archon model's abilities, they can't be used inside a transport. Almost all army lists for Drukhari are based around their transports. So when you see an Archon appearing in pretty much every tournament list, he's getting played on foot, so the army starts with a pain token, his abilities can be used, and on a home objective, the 2+ invulnerable save which lasts until you fail it can be really annoying for enemies to kill him. In a regular Aeldari army, the Archon could be a good leader, but not in a transport-reliant Dark Eldar list. And there are no transports like the Imperial Guard Chimera that lets you issue orders from inside. But there are good Incubi units whose damage 2 weapons are great for countering all the Space Marine players out there. Dark Lancers are cheap, and if you have your Rain, yes, these are good inclusions in a Ynnari army. Blood Angels. The Space Marines after my own heart. These results are from tournaments that came out before the new Space Marine Codex, so when it says Blood Angels, it's referring to the Sons of Sanguinius detachment, or, as far as I know, the use of the Gladius task force, but with Blood Angels units included, making Blood Angels your sub-faction keyword. Once you have a unit like the Death Company, you can't have any other sub-faction units. When the results are referring to just Space Marines, that is using sub-factions like the Ultramarines, Marneus Calgar, or Lysander of the Imperial Fists, or only having units without any Space Marine sub-faction keyword. The Blood Angels army rule is based on combat. The extra strength and attacks are nice, but the Space Marine detachments in the Codex, they're all shooting focused. There's no jump pack focused detachment for traditional Blood Angels. Worse is to come, as the changes to the Oath of Moment we have in the Space Marine Codex, it is no longer rerolls to hit and wound, it is only rerolls to hit. Will probably mean that the Blood Angels, more than any other sub-faction, will continue to drop down the rankings. Otherwise, if you have none of the combat-focused Blood Angels units, Red Marines will just be counted among the Space Marine rankings instead of the Blood Angels. Right now, the Gladius task force is the best for them. Even if only for one turn, advancing and charging from the Assault Doctrine, followed by fallback and charge in the Tactical Doctrine, because you don't have to do them in a strict order anymore, that serves them better than the Sons of Sanguinius detachment. And better than +1 strength from that is the Lance ability you get from Honor the Chapter in the Gladius detachment, which gives you +1 to wound if you charged. So I wouldn't expect the Blood Angels to improve in the coming months. Custodes. Yeah, I thought they would go down. The Custodes players at my club switched armies, and it wasn't because Custodes are so OP that no one would play against them. I've done a video on Devastating Wounds and how Devastating Wounds can be exploited. Custodes are one of the big victims of that. Their only detachments lets them ignore mortal wounds and a 4+. If you cause devastating wounds instead, such as from combi weapons, there is no protection, and they melt away without having other units to counterattack because of their high points value. A lot of their more competitive units went up in points, along with some of their not so competitive units, and they had a big reliance on a fight first mechanic to win combats. It cost 2 command points, but their shield captain used to give it for free. With the change so that only battle tactic stratagems are free, Custodes players are just holding on to the command point to use this stratagem, otherwise they die to a strong assault force. Genestealer Cult acolytes with mining weapons are the perfect example. Mostly used for demo charges, but their damage 3 on the mining weapons would push Custodes straight into the invulnerable save of 4+, and if that's failed, a Custodes is dead. So that's a great example of why the Custodes need to fight first to remove that glass cannon threat. They are still very tough for a lot of players, but the changes to their rules and their points, they may have been overdone. A little bit of points reduction or letting their detachment work again against devastating wounds should help them back up. The Grey Knights. Now, though they look like Space Marines, they work alone and can't use any of the Space Marine detachments. They have a lot of strength of Space Marines and have some maneuverability with their faction rule. But they lack the rerolls that come naturally to a lot of other factions. There is the Venerable Dreadnought for rerolling hits and wounds of 1, but it can't teleport around to match the speed of the units it should be supporting. Much like the Battle Sisters, they lack anti-tank. And strangely, they also lack anti-demon weapons. There is only one in the whole codex, so you can't play them truly effectively against demons, even for fluff. And the points drop that they had just hasn't helped them that much. The Astra Militarum make great Brood Brothers units. Their best weapons and units that can operate without orders, like the Basilisk and the Hellhound, can come over to the good side. Extra arms leaves room for extra hugs. All are welcome within the 4-armed Emperor's embrace. They have a lot of synergy between units. Sentinels helping artillery, orders making infantry stronger, tanks just having massive goodbye cannons. I expected them to be average, and they are. A lot of it comes out of the matchups for the Guard more than any other army. If you go tank heavy or infantry heavy, there are opponents that just can't counter that. But on a mixed list, if your opponent knows how to cut up the synergy by removing the sentinels and assassinating characters, the Guard fall apart. Then again, their reinforcement stratagem is strong to the point where my Astra Militarum opponent was getting more troops back than I was as a Genestealer Cult player. Games Workshop puts them at 46% win rate, but I don't think Guard players are too upset right now. Comments may inform me otherwise, but they have a large roster that allows a lot of versatility so they can adapt to the meta more than most other factions. Factions like the Imperial Knights. What happened to the Knights? There were several layers of penalties to towering units, that they couldn't shoot through buildings anymore, that their big flame cannons just can't fire Overwatch. So that's a big unit put aside in most tournament lists. They relied more on armigers, but then armigers went up in points. An opponent might not be able to kill a big knight, but I think all lists can take down multiple armigers, so there have been far fewer tools available. The knights themselves are still big, strong creatures, but unlike the versatile Astra Militarum, you can't just tweak your list a little bit to be better. So the knight players have had a worse time of it lately. The Space Marines are the Codex compliant chapters or are players using only units from the core Space Marine Index, even if painted grey or a superior red. We want Space Marines to be average, and Games Workshop to spend the most time making sure they are the average 50%. They are the most played army, the poster boys for 40k, and so they are the army that you're most likely to come up against. If they're too powerful, no one has fun in 40k, or Space Marine versus Space Marine matches become so common that you think it's Horus Heresy 2.0. This happened in the past and caused one of the biggest pushes for balance about midway through 9th edition. So the win rate of 47% for them is nice for the game, and it's probably not going to go up much with their Codex. No detachment is game breaking, but if you know how to use them and you have the units to use them well, there are a few strong options. But what was probably their strongest unit, the Desolation Marines, went up in points and is max squad size of 5. I think the Space Marines are stronger than the 47%, and this comes from Oath of Moment. It doesn't scale. It is 1 unit per turn. So in a 2K game, as most of these tournaments were, that isn't doing a lot. Even less when the new Codex version is only rerolls to hit, not rerolls to wound as well. The First Company detachment gives reroll to wound, but only once per game. I like most of the detachments, they're fun for enhancing your playstyle, and chapter nature, but fun and fluffy rarely win tournaments. The Sisters list that had 3 Sister Squads, one with a Stormbolter, one with a Flamer, one with a Melter, to have the Holy Trinity represented. Yes, that was an exception. Space Marines do rather well at 1000 points and alright at 1.5k. 2k, they struggle against all but the very elite, and the very elite can counter the slightly elite of the Space Marines. And you also have to remember that because Space Marines are so popular as a faction, a lot of new inexperienced players take part, bringing the win rate numbers down. This is the opposite to the Genestealer Cult problem because of how difficult they were to play in earlier editions. We used to have so few players that only standout gamers attended, boosting the Genestealer Cult win rate. But for regular Space Marines, I don't think Games Workshop is going to change much in January when the points are tweaked. Necrons are another popular faction because they were in the 9th edition starter set and have been supported by cheap models from the Imperium magazine. So their win rate is pushed down to more what you would see at a local level. It would have been funny if their results went down last time and then they'd gotten back up, but scratch that joke, I guess. Warrior blocks are strong. Lichguard blocks are strong. I will have to show you how to break these blocks before they have a new Codex release and even more players come along to pick up the easy to paint metal fellows. Their Hexmark is a pain and puts the Kelemorph to shame for gunslinging, and their detachment and stratagems have a lot to do with characters making big blocks of models strong. There are a lot of counters, but not for every army. Horde Necrons with a bit of gun support is about the only way to play Necrons that I'm seeing right now. Hopefully their Codex will open up more for them, maneuverability with monoliths, and face murder with the leggy destroyers. How quickly players adapt to the best of their stratagems and detachments will depend on whether their numbers go up or down. The Tyranids are another popular faction, but not as popular as Necron, which really speaks more to the speed at which we paint and build our armies rather than the love of robots over bugs. By 11th edition, Tyranids will be the second most popular faction. You'll see. But you're noticing the trend. Popular factions get mid-rankings. Their new detachments are fun, and people have tried them all out at tournaments as well as different playstyles. I like this. I like this a lot. I have played against most of the detachments in the new Tyranid book now, and they are fun. Invasion Fleet has been the most popular, partly because then you're not trying to learn a whole new playstyle right before attending a tournament. So don't take its prevalence as confirmation that Invasion Swarm is best. This is von Carmian's Metawatch, and I'm not going to assume that everyone at a tournament is going there with a meta-power mindset. They have a lot of effective, not necessarily powerful units. The gargoyles can move after shooting like the Seraphim can, so they can get to cover or get onto an objective after deep striking. In Invasion Fleet and Endless Swarm, they can come back, and they're popular to take with the other detachments too. Spore Mines launched by Viavors cannot hold objectives, but they can complete secondary objectives, same for the cheap Ripper Swarms. And the change to Insane Bravery so that it can only be used once per game and only before making the roll has helped their new Relictor to put the scare on folks, weeks before Mischief Night. For the tournament regulars that play Tyranids, I think they are higher than the 48%, but the influx of new players has brought the percentage win rate down. What will you get at a local level? It will depend on the player and how much they are able to tailor their collection to get the best out of their detachment rule. The Dark Angels have a lot of the Space Marine problems, and they were stronger, with scary regenerating Terminators because they have an apothecary in the unit. But Terminators and Lionel Johnson are a lot of points and they don't make up for it. Lionel Johnson isn't coming in to save the faction from the mid-rankings. It's a trap. The problem I've often seen is a reliance on Terminators in these big centerpiece models and units, and they don't get their points worth in battle. They're slow, and Ravenwing isn't currently able to bring the Dark Angels up to where they were. The devastating wounds can bypass the Watcher in the Dark and Lionel Johnson's aura ability to ignore mortal wounds on a 4+, but with these good units, I think we may see a lot more First Company detachment play in the new Space Marine Codex, so for now, their win rate will be tied closely to the Codex Space Marines. Ah, the Genestealer Cult. I expected it would come tumbling down, but I was okay with that. I want a faction that is known as mid, so that when I put it on the table, I don't get comments about how the bikes are OP, or this unit and that unit are absurd, even if my list doesn't have any of them in it. So we're at 49%, but really, we may be lower than that, because we are one of the least played factions at tournaments, so these are some of our best players, getting near equal win rates with the new Tyranid players. Evidently the Star Gods will consume all. Quite a few things have changed, not so drastically to the point where my videos are invalid or anything. I still have a whole playlist of Genestealer Cult videos that work, and we have several key strengths going for us. Stratagems and enhancements are strong even if the detachment rule itself is nothing to write home about. Being able to deploy 3 inches away and then throw demo charges, first turn charge with aberrants and also infiltrating Genestealers. We have quite a few lone operatives to complete secondaries, and if one, like the Reductus, goes up in points, tournament players can go to the Kellamorph for that fix. We have a lot to be thankful for, but the points increase we got did hurt. If a unit was in any way good, it went up 10 points. Genestealers went down. Possibly because we have new Genestealer models, and if Games Workshop can sell a box to 2 different factions, just saying. But with the points increase, Acolytes have to be tooled up to the gills. If they mutate gills. I guess not, maybe more of a metamorph thing. Otherwise, they are not worth the points, which really sucks for casual play. We've seen the Nexus drop out of lists. At the start of the edition, competitive lists would have at least 1. Now they are just not seen because the only stratagems they can make free are battle tactics. That was in the last balance patch. So no arriving 3 inches away or doing that twice in a phase, or extra demo charge power. Then there's the change to the army special rule. Our units are only popping back up on a 5+, otherwise they go off home for tea. Finally, Games Workshop has found a way to incorporate the sheer power of Tiffin to draw troops from the battlefield. I am happy with this, though it does make the faction one of the more difficult to play again because you have expensive weak troops and you need to be crafty. Having lots of neophytes and acolytes was a tactic that anyone could understand. But if they always come back, games could take so long. In most games, turn 5 if you can get to it, that can be over in 10 minutes. But not if you're playing Genestealer Cult and you have 6 units that need to make a last-ditch attempt at objectives. For game flow, this is better, and you are more protective of your units because you are uncertain if they'll come back. The points increase has also meant we have to buy fewer models to get started, so there is that upside for new Genestealer Cult players. But you have some tactical learning to do, and I will help you out with that, my little neophyte. Oh, if you want to become an official neophyte, that is the cheapest support tier on my Ko-Fi. If you have had a giggle and or got something useful from this video, you should consider signing up. Or you can just drop some coins in my one-off tip jar. It all helps the cause. So I'm happy with the Genestealer Cult changes, I am happy with the win rate, even if it is higher than what you will see at a casual player level. However, the Endless Tides of Infantry were a great counter for Aeldari and their powerful single-shot weapons with re-rolling hits and wounds. Wraithguard didn't have the speed to snap up our blip tokens, so without Genestealer Cult being as good or having guaranteed respawns, the Aeldari have stayed up at the top. The Battle Sisters. The Battle Sisters have a steep learning curve, but once you're in, you're in. Battle Sisters are a lot of fun as a faction. Have I mentioned that someone put a church organ on a tank? What will they think of next? Oh yeah, snipers on stilts. Martyrdom comes to all of us, but if you have sisters, you knew that. Even among meta chasers, I have only known one person sell their sister's army because it was no longer good. We long-term players have waited decades for the sisters to be playable. Bloody Rose made us powerful, but skewed all of the tournament lists in one direction. Playing sisters as any other sub-faction casually was just nowhere near as good. So this is why you should always know that results like this come with a side order of just pure salt. I mean that in the pinch of salt sense, not the angry internet way of salt. Anyway, player base is only slightly higher for sisters than it is for Genestealer Cult, and I have several videos on why not a lot of people play sisters, so again, we are sending our best to the tournaments, winning one, as I detailed in my video, but there is more to why win rates are up than people suddenly realizing that novitiates were useful. The points drop we had sucked if you are just starting out because it is a lot of models more to buy, but points will change. I thought that it would make little difference to us when I also considered that the Deathguard and the Leagues of Votann were getting such big boosts that I thought they would jump straight past us. They have, but we didn't get crushed down as a result. What the points drop meant was we can take more units, and so we have barriers of units. Some sisters acting just as a cordon for counter-attacking, and we have a lot of combos that can work to counter whatever the enemy has just used to kill that sister barrier. The points change in favour means that we are, in tournament terms, trading up. Some enemy factions don't have the troops with enough power but low points to take out a Battle Sister unit. If some 8-bound destroy an Immolator, a Penitent Engine or 10 Sisters, we can immediately kill them by countering with Retributors or Dominions from an Immolator, Novitiates and a Palatine, Repentia. They won't hold up against lasguns on the front line, but they make a good counter-attacking unit. But it is only some factions that are so elite that they don't have good chaff to send. Orc players have the power to swap boys for sisters in a way that makes a strange line in my script that only 40k players will understand, and also, they then have more boys to follow. Tau can shoot us and not care, and Necrons might have the staying power to survive the counterattack. Celestine is good. Having gender-swapped Jesus and our 12 disciples, 2 Gemini and 10 Zephyrim or 10 Seraphim, drop into the enemy backboard with reroll to charge or lots of hand flamers is nice for clearing their home defenses of heretics. Meta-wise, at tournaments we are doing okay. In casual play, it is still difficult to learn these tactics, to send some units to die, and to think about that as a faction that shouldn't really be doing horde tactics like that. Or we have a few well-tuned units to use over and over and it's taken time to filter those out. But these aren't always the units that we filthy casuals may have. A sister squad with a Dialogus and a Palatine can make any miracle dice used on a melter gun go straight through to damage. The hit roll has succeeded because the Dialogus makes a miracle dice of a 6, it wounds because the Palatine gives lethal hits to the unit, and there's probably no save because of the -4 AP on the melter. The Triumph of St. Catherine with those sisters and a Castigator firing rapid-fire autocannons can be a very powerful counter-attacking block in 2000 points. Big Arco-Flagellant blocks, maybe with a Preacher, are also very good, and they hold better than sisters can, and they can whip their way through units of Orks. 2 Exorcists and 2 Castigators can handle a range of foes, and Palatines. Palatines can be the sleepers waiting to strike in a lot of units, and they make regular sisters good with their lethal hits. But we don't see many Palatines because they need miracle dice to activate their ability. If we suddenly got more miracle dice, like with the 8th and 9th edition Sacred Rose subfaction ability, then many Palatines will work. Also, we can only have 1 Sword of St. Eleanor, something that Games Workshop managed to miss out from Mr. Clodner's list. Surely someone must have been wondering why it was 15 points short. Should we be worried that the people behind Metawatch don't understand sisters? No, it's probably fine. I doubt the rules writers also write articles. So the sisters are doing better in the global meta, but on a casual level, we still have a lot to learn and only a few really effective tactics to employ to be good. So for casual players having a game a month, I don't think get good is an effective faction fix. We can no longer just run Repentia and Seraphim at the enemy and be pretty confident that it will work out okay. So I will be here to help you all in the future, and importantly, to have fun with the sisters while doing so. The Space Wolves. I expect that they will stay with their rankings above the regular Space Marines. The new Stormlands Task Force suits their Thunderwolf cavalry well, and I can see some White Scars plays painting up some of those to go with their force when they're maxed out on Primaris Bikers, the firstborn bikers that were generally preferred are now in Legends, and so they can't be used at tournaments. Space Wolves have the same problem as Space Marines, but they have strong extra datasheets. Their characters are especially strong, which they need for their detachment, Champions of Rust, which gives bonuses when a character's unit destroys an enemy unit. You have to earn a bonus. But there are lots of cheap Wolfguard characters to make every unit a character unit. Or you can use the Gladius Task Force and then you get to choose a bonus. Falling back and shooting and charging, or Thunderwolves that advance and charge, Longfangs advancing on objectives or up tall buildings and still shooting, that works. They have one other issue that needs fixing, but I'll talk about that when I talk about the Deathwatch. But strong individual units, good cheap firstborn in Grey Hunters and Bloodclaws, and Fenrisian Wolves to complete secondaries, the Space Wolves will be among the strongest Marines. I am having trouble fitting both a Wolf and a Space Marine in the same frame. Never mind, I got it. Deathguard. With their new plagues, the Deathguard are adaptable, and they're able to counter the majority of enemy factions. Genestealer Cult really don't like the -1 to hit on Neophytes and Acolytes. Demo charges that are only hitting on a 6 is a problem. Sisters are scared by the -1 to their save. It's all we have. Apart from, you know, the feel no pains from Hospitalers, Repentia and Arco-Flagellants. But Deathguard players wouldn't know anything about that, now would they? So in among the cries of hold me back, Deathguard players have a lot more going for them, including a points drop. They can go for a horde of Poxwalkers and Marines. They can go heavy with Terminators and then they are tough, perhaps not their 9th edition tough, but then their detachment rule of sticky objectives serves them very well. What their units lack in abilities, just on the datasheet abilities, for a lot of units the profile is the unit, and you have to add good characters on top of that to get buffs. But the Deathguard have lots of characters to do that, and the vehicles to back them up. That is why Deathguard are doing much better than before. The Mechanicus are way up, suspiciously like they now have pogo legs, but Mechanicus are doing better than previous tournaments, even before Frank Grimes Jr. comes in and shakes up all this meta again. Because of how badly they were at the start of 10th edition, and unlike the Deathguard, didn't have a lot of players from an edition starter box set, we don't have that much data on Mechanicus. You'll have to tell me what your local meta is like. For me, there is still a sigh before someone says, I'll play AdMech. They are getting a new Codex soon, and that will change their lackluster detachment Rad Bombardment, but what mainly happened to bring their win rate up is they got much cheaper and they needed it. Skitarii Rangers and Vanguard are now usable. Through weapons and their army rule, they can get -2 AP pretty easily. But there's little we can say about them for certain, less we should say, and even if we did say something about the Mechanicus, it will be limited as the rules for them will change very soon. Do you like 8-bound? You're probably going to want some 8-bound in your World Eaters army. Their points drop help them out along with Berserkers, while units with guns have fallen by the wayside. The World Eaters Hellbrute is still very funny with its infinite firepower. Their detachment rule is worryingly similar to the Blood Angels, but unlike the Blood Angels, their ability to have units scout lets them get closer to the enemy and into combat with some of their units on turn 1. The points rebalance has left the faction somewhat one-dimensional and vulnerable to Overwatch and units with fight first, and they are an elite army. So if you take out their cultists and spawn, then their better units either have to complete secondaries and hold objectives, or kill you. There is a very low player base for World Eaters, and with few good units, I don't think that they are average, I think they're below average. Exceptions do exist, as we saw at Tampa, but for most players, even tournament players, running at the enemy shouting "Blood for the Blood God" will fail if their opponent has an effective screen. But it is nice that they're doing better. So there's this guy. Didn't get to be ever chosen in the old world of Warhammer and has decided to pop over to 40k to ruin your day. Be'lakor can shield a lot of the demon army from shooting, that thing that most armies do, and then your demons who weren't shielded can come in 3 inches away or 6 inches away from deep strike. This very much feels like Be'lakor's detachment, but I'm looking forward to seeing how the other 4 gods fare alone with their own detachments. That should be fun. Remember that they won't exclude units from other gods, just stratagems will benefit the units of one god. So if one Tzeentch unit is really good, like, oh I don't know, Flamers, hypothetically, then a Slaanesh army will still be able to include them, just not necessarily use stratagems on them. Nurglings, a unit that went down in points, is the go-to for actions, and they have been the action monkey of Chaos Marine players and Chaos Knights. So we know that there is one unit that does its job very well, but the points increase to a lot of demon units has knocked greater demons off a lot of lists, if you were taking one at all. A combat-focused demon tide that is tough because of the invulnerable saves and high toughness of units like the Plague Bearers seems to be the way to go. Demonettes are a little pricey for their weak bodies, and the urge to add in Chaos Knights instead is strong. So demons are okay, but if the opponent has enough bullets, strike first in combat, or has a unit like the Clamavus that can deny deep strike, then the demons just have a sad time. I think we'll see a points increase on the Nurgle units and a points decrease for Slaanesh. Tzeentch's own legion, the Thousand Suns, they miss the diversity of the psychic phase, and they've been focused onto fewer and fewer units. With the points increased, they're going tighter and tighter in on Cabal points and using rituals. Now these rituals are powerful. Ahriman can just pick a unit and their clothes fall off. As in, they have no armor save. So lists tend to include Ahriman and or Magnus, a centerpiece Primarch that actually does the work well, gets those Cabal points up and does damage. Anything that isn't giving Cabal points or working to the core of the army, like Terminators and Rubik Marines, it's just not appearing. Good for them that the psychic keyword isn't some horrible crutch, but if you bought the Thousand Suns Combat Patrol as a start and are now covered in Zangors, that side of the army isn't being played as much and the general points increases seem to have only tightened it to that core playstyle. With a little points drop to some Zangor type units, players could have more freedom to have fun with the Thousand Suns. The veterans of the Deathwatch. Their firstborn veterans and the Proteus kill team are carrying them, while their Primaris kill teams are just not as good as the regular versions of those Primaris units. Why would I want to have +1 to hit and wound when under half strength on my toughest unit? A unit that is unlikely to be taking that amount of damage. And there are so many little errors that need to be put right with this sub-faction, and I'm hoping for an errata. The Assault Intercessors on the Fortis kill team hit on a 4+, not a 3+. The bolt weapons of the Gravis Heavy Intercessors are not listed among the bolt weapons list, and we have, as with the Space Wolves especially, issues about which characters can join the Deathwatch units. The Deathwatch veterans can be joined by characters that can join Vanguard veterans, a unit that's now in Legends. So characters like the Apothecary, the Chaplain, the Captains, the only watch captains outside of Watch Captain Artemis can't join them, because none of these new Space Marine Codex characters have it mentioned on their datasheet that they can join Vanguard veterans. If the rule was to change to say characters that could join Tactical Squad or Assault Intercessors can join the Deathwatch veterans, then it would work. While the stratagems to make bolt weapons better are not the best thing now that they only work on bolt weapons, being able to teleport two incredibly strong Proteus kill teams across the board is very useful, as well as the Beacon Angelus to start a unit as a deep striking unit like the Proteus kill team, and rapid ingress for free. And while the Space Marines are losing the Oath of Moment reroll to wound, if you have the Tome of Ectoclades, then you get a second enemy unit, which, at time of recording, has not been errated, that specifies that you can reroll the hit roll and the wound roll against that enemy target. More than that, while the Gladius Task Force gives you benefits to the shooting, then the combat, Deathwatch can go all combat or all shooting and still do very well with the Black Spear Task Force mission tactics, which mean you can deal with hordes, then you can deal with monsters. And with precision, you can also deal with characters to some extent. Any army that isn't focusing heavily on infantry or very heavily on vehicles and monsters is going to suffer against the Deathwatch. And at 2,000 points, you are more likely to see a mix of those units. There's not that many players bringing 150 Tyranids to the board. Chaos Knights. Why are Chaos Knights up so much higher than the Imperial Knights when they are fundamentally the same army? Unlike the Loyalist Knights that relied on the Bondsman ability, the Chaos Knights rely on Battle Shock. The change to Insane Bravery helped them out. Now they are truly scary as an army on the table without a universal strat that everyone has that can counter them. For some armies, the toughness, wounds and armor that you have to get through again and again is difficult, but if the Chaos Knights can last, having a turn where the opponent scores no points because of Battle Shock can swing the game for you. So while the Imperial Knights are having to have a mix of armigers and larger knights, Chaos Knights can go very hard on the War Dogs. And Chaos Knights are more popular than Imperial Knights to play at tournaments, so the Chaos Knights results are more accurate than theirs, so casually, I think there is more than a 5-point difference between them. While Imperial Knights are limited to 2 assisting units and 2 assisting Imperial Agents characters, Chaos Knights can go all in on Nurglings for their objective holding and secondaries. The points change to the kind of War Dogs that they did rely on hurt more than the terrain and Overwatch changes because they were already relying so heavily on the little guys. Not that they can really hoard. But if I said that you could have between 120 and 160 models in a 2K list, you would assume I meant Tyranids, or Imperial Guard, not a Space Marine faction. The Black Templars players I know have only bought the new Space Marine Codex for the stats. The new detachment don't seem as good as the one they already have, the Righteous Crusade. Like the Deathguard, this can counter any enemy you face, but the Black Templars have the power of the best of the Space Marine Codex plus as many cheap yet scary Marines as you need. And there are not that many armies out there that can deal with that many Marines. Their only drawbacks are the drawbacks that the Space Marines have. So if you are looking at the new Space Marine detachments and thinking, okay, I could play these for fun, if you're thinking more competitively, you might want to look towards the Black Templars. The Tau. We have a correction of the greater good rule, so tournament players are now using it properly. And also, with a points drop, they have more units on the table, bit like the Sisters. So the Tau are now putting the power of friendship to work. The power of friendship is the name of a massive laser cannon. The points change has led to a lot more diverse Tau lists. Kroot Hordes, Breacher Strike, a focus around battlesuits, Vespids are getting a look in. They now have the firepower to compete against more opponents, and as hiding turn 1, like a coward, is popular at tournaments over casual play where you may only actually get 3 turns in before the store closes, their Cao Yun for later game shooting works there, even if it feels kinda tacked on in a casual game. They still fold like Japanese origami, but now with backup bodies to replace their losses. Sounds almost like Genestealer Cult. And for the Chaos Marines, I'd say Chaos Marines, I mean Chaos Cultists, the combination of Dark Communes and a Cursed Cultist is what is bringing it home for the big Chaos lists. It sounds like a lot of Cultist work, so Genestealer Cult getting knocked down and replaced with regular Chaos Cultists? I see how it is. With a Mark of Nurgle to become untargetable at more than 12 inches away, or a Mark of Chaos Undivided so that when you get into combat you can reroll all hits and wounds, these powerful little guys get to advance and charge once per game with the Dark Commune, so you don't even need a Mark of Slanesh, so they are making it to the enemy and doing damage once there, all far cheaper than the World Eaters. Combat has become the focus of the Chaos Marines, and I think their points changes went a little bit too far or had too extreme a result. If the points went down on a unit, it went into the tournament list. Chosen, Possessed, Warp Talons, all supporting the fast cultists, while units that went up in price, like a few of the shooting units, Obliterators, Forge Fiends, They went up and so out of lists. You may have thought that Terminators with Abaddon was the way to go, but I keep banking on Cultists. If a Terminator fails a Dark Pact test, then one of them may die. If a Cultist unit fails it, then 3 dead Cultists is not an issue, and in an Accursed Cultist unit, they can come back in the next command phase. Yours or your opponent's. Other types of Cultists perform actions, or if you turn to Demons for those cheap giggling fellows, or some blue scribes, they can perform actions. The Cultists rule the Chaos Space Marines, not the other way around. And they have the bodies to control the board, complete secondaries, and hit hard. When every unit can get lethal hits, every unit is a threat to vehicles. So that is why Chaos is up against other factions. But the real jump was Votann. They have grudge tokens. Grudge tokens give you +1 to hit against a unit. 2 grudge tokens gives you +1 to hit and +1 to wound. Now, with the balance data sheet, you can pick some enemy units and they start the battle with 2 grudge tokens. So already we're getting +1 to hit and wound against those units. And unlike the Space Marines' Oath of Moment, this scales in size. So it's not just 2 units getting it, it's 2 units at incursion size, or at the 2,000 points that most tournaments are, and 6 units at the more apocalyptic onslaught size. The drawback of the Leagues of Votann is they have a very small roster. Not counting the special character of Uther, as he's just a Carl with a twist, there are 11 units. Space Marine Divergent chapters have more than that without having to use any of the regular Space Marine units. So a 2k Votann list is going to look very similar to another 2k Votann list. This stops the Votann rising really high, not just because of their physical size. If they did go up any more, it would be easy for players to figure out counters to them to bring the whole army back down, unlike the Aeldari that have a lot of units that they can go to. So Games Workshop, careful how you nerf, if you do nerf them. We have seen that their points going down a little has had a big impact on their units, so tweaking even one of their units down will probably see that unit disappear from tournament lists, or bring the whole faction further down. The core of their army is all of the units that they have. But we have Orks, and Orks have gone way up. Oh, it's going to be a good Orktober. A lot of that is the points that the Orks have, and some efficient units. Some more combos or repeated tactics like what we see on the Battle Sisters. I'm not saying nuance is dead for the tournament players of this faction, but Orks, 6 Squig Hog Boys, and a knob on the Smasher Squig, with the ability to get anti-vehicle, anti-monster 3+ once per game, that can knock most things off an objective. You now have the objectives, but how do you survive? Wah, Mr. Bond. That is giving them a 5+ invulnerable save. And most players are not prepared for the amount of high-strength anti-infantry firepower required to defeat this many Orks. But we have issues that will probably see Orks fall way down in January depending on how Games Workshop changes things. There are a lot of Ork units, but apart from one player trying to win the Ice Hammer tournament with a Gargantuan Squiggoth, we're seeing the same kind of units repeated over and over in tournament lists. These units aren't taken to this degree in casual lists, so I'm very happy for the Orks. But trucks are 60 points. No other transport comes close to their efficiency. Unless points come down on other vehicles, if Games Workshop puts the trucks point up, the speed war will not leave the pit stop. Regular Ork boys are 85 points for 10. Remember that Genestealer Acolytes are 85 points for 5. Flash Skits are also doing nicely with their firepower, and Gretchen's performing actions very cheaply at 40 points. They have enough bodies that a single bolt gun can't stop them, the way it can for 2 Death Cult Assassins. You can't just sneeze and knock over a unit of Gretchen. You need to really put your whole body behind that sneeze. So lots of Orks are doing well. Aeldari are still doing better. Dark Eldar at the bottom, Light Eldar on top, the perfect way to end a meta sandwich. The Eldar are still strong, but have come down a bit because of their minor points reductions. And I'm still seeing arguments that their detachment rule should be changed to only allow a unit to reroll a hit roll or a wound roll, not both. Their Fate dice are still noticeably better than the Battle Sisters Miracle dice, and Fate dice don't scale. They work really well at 2,000 points. They work even better at 1,000 points. You get the same amount of Fate dice either way, unlike in 9th edition. A lot of the early 10th edition win rates for Eldar were because they were one of the factions that had easy synergy of the detachment rule and the obvious single shot weapons. These high strength weapons were also very valuable at taking down vehicles, something that became strong in this edition. So Eldar weren't just getting strong, it was also easy to play to their strengths as a casual, and especially at a tournament level. Other people are just figuring out how to use Battle Sisters. Aeldari players already had this down. They have a lot of units that work well. If points go up on fire prisms, the Aeldari bring out the Night Spinners. Wraithguard get tweaked, they switch to Wraith Lords. As weapon platforms go up in price, they change to the Night Spinners or the Warwalkers. But Aeldari have come down. Part of that is tournament players learning and adapting. Even when there had been no balance patches for win rates at the start of past editions, where tracked, it was somewhat uneven because players were taking the lists of the previous edition with minor tweaks to see what worked. It just hadn't been as drastic as the start of 10th edition. The Sisters take a lot of work to adapt. Aeldari didn't. The balance patch has helped a little, and the limits of fate dice, so you can no longer dump them all in the first 2 turns to table a non-Genestealer Cult opponent, has helped. But all of the strengths of the Eldar from the earlier in 10th edition are still there. And that's what's keeping them at the top, even with the change to devastating wounds so that they're not mortal wounds. The surprise extra faction, Imperial Agents. Games Workshop has no results for them alone, but I think one person had an army of all agents in the London Grand Tournament if my info from there is correct. They had 3 victories and 2 losses, so if that was the only tournament result, they are at a 60% win rate. Way above the Aeldari. Clearly OP. Please nerf. Now hopefully your army wasn't in the first half of this video, because that was where the weaker factions were. This video has taken a while, and so isn't quite on trend anymore. Mayflies have been born, found love, reproduced, and tried to find meaning in the coming void in the time it took me to make this video. So please, spread it where you can. Sorry the editing has been a little light, but I'm not sorry to the version of myself who does the editing. Just remember that however long this video is, I have talked for about 3 times as long and cut out the more rambly bits. It's like making a sword. You need enough metal to make a good sword. If you don't have enough metal, don't try and make the sword. And if you have loads of extra bits sticking out, better save them for another video. I mean sword. In the Games Workshop Metawatch, Stu mentioned that Jeff, apparently on first name terms, and his sister army came first at the US Open Tampa. In this video, I break down the army list and recommend some unusual combos that you sister players may not have considered before. With faith, we will get the extra meta point and be on 50%.